So my presentation is on multinational projects, specifically applying lessons from Afghanistan to Mars. And why am I even remotely qualified to talk about it at all, even a little bit? Well, I'll introduce myself. My name is Todd Gilbert. I'm an information systems technician, first class petty officer in the United States Navy. I have 10 years of military experiences working in multinational operations. I've worked with officers and representatives over 40 countries, and I have worked for the U.S. Navy in Japan for 4 years, and I was part of a combined joint interagency task force in Afghanistan from September 2012 to September 2013. What does that mean? Combined joint interagency task force means we work with multiple agencies in the U.S., we work with multiple branches of the military, and we work with multiple countries. So it's pretty much a big name that means we work with everyone. Let's see here. The top photo right there, that's actually all of the different countries, one representative of each of the different countries that's part of the international security forces in Afghanistan, and each one carrying their own flag. There's where I worked in Japan, and then of course I just came back from Honolulu. I was working for the big RIMPAC operation we do out there every 2 years in Hawaii, which is pretty fantastic actually. Go to the next slide. So when we look to Mars as a potential outpost for human life beyond Earth, we kind of gaze at a location that's even more desolate than the sands and mountains of Afghanistan. We often speak of international organizations or United Nations efforts to get us to this new frontier. The wars and following nation-building effort in Afghanistan continues to cost the U.S. to the tune of more than $6 trillion to date. Higher than the adjusted cost for inflation for World War II, which is about $5 trillion. The estimates for high estimates for what it would take to put people on Mars is about $500 billion, or about 500 million. Unfortunately, the 486 million is what NASA's been given for funding through its entire inception, from the very beginning to the end. So if you just want to compare, yes, exactly. When you want to compare, 486 billion. If you want to compare just 1 year, if we just had 6 months of Afghanistan war funding, that would pretty much equal about what we have been given for NASA through its entire inception. With that, we paid for, of course. You can see the 150 million is the International Space Station, and the Apollo missions cost about 110 million adjusted for 110 billion. Adjusted for inflation, and then the low estimate for what it would take to put humans on Mars is about 6 billion. Now, 60 nations contributed to the effort of establishing over 700 to 700 bases as of 2010 in a part of the world where there had previously been nothing much more substantial than opiate farms. And what resulted is an amazingly unique and complex logistics effort that was at both times incredibly successful, even awe-inspiring, and at other times resulted in what people have called quote, a widespread corruption, incompetence, and a loss of resources on a scale never before seen. Not my quote, but some people have said that. Many of the logistics, the international and interagency operations involved in running a war can be compared to the massive effort that will be required to make human life multiplanetary. From food and shelter to power infrastructure to equipment repair, fuel depots, and the implementation of a multilingual and multicultural work environment, Mars and Afghanistan have more in common than the average taxpayer would expect. And we actually have an analog in the space community. This is the International Space Station, as you all obviously know. Launched in 1998, it has been continuously occupied for nearly 14 years, which actually predates the Afghan war by about 10 months, as before when it was continuously manned. Considering costing the participating nations that built it $150 billion, it's arguably considered the most expensive single object mankind has ever produced. Now, one of the first of three things I want to talk about for major comparisons between Afghan operations and potential of putting humans on Mars is, I want to start right here. During the height of the Afghan war, there were only a few ways to move materials into the country. Ammunition and personnel were airlifted in, while food, fuel, equipment, and everything else had to come through these trade routes you see right here. So mostly, they had to go either over Iran, or you would ship them below through the Atlantic, below Africa, into the port of Karachi, which is in Pakistan, or else you come up through the Pacific, come through Pakistan. The largest regular movement of supplies arrives on boats at the port of Karachi in Afghanistan. And in 2010, 2 Pakistani border guards were killed by a NATO helicopter. And trade routes through Pakistan were closed for an entire week. A similar incident in November of 2011 killed 24 Pakistani troops. And as a result, the route through Pakistan, which carried 80% of the fuel and a majority of the supplies that we were shipping into Afghanistan for coalition forces, was completely closed by the Pakistani government. And because of political tensions, they had elections coming up. Within and without the country, this route would remain closed until July of 2012, until after the U.S. Secretary of State formally apologized. During the conflict, several options were considered to get around this problem, including an airlift operation that would have dwarfed the Berlin airlift. A new northern route, which is the yellow one that you see up there, the yellowish-orange one, that one was what was decided, that we were going to start shipping supplies to get around the Pakistan problem. And after that political issue was resolved, although we started shipping supplies back through Pakistan, it never reached the levels it was before. But the important part about this, and why I'm talking about this at a Mars conference, is, well, this event showed us the importance of developing political diversity in our supply chain, thus preventing a political crisis in the world from shutting down or slowing our operations efforts. Let me bring it back into the space realm to give you a better example. The Ukraine crisis, Crimea being occupied and now kind of annexed, an even more recent analog can be seen here with strained diplomatic tensions between the United States and Russia, and economic sanctions being placed on high-ranking individuals, including Deputy Prime Minister Dmitry, forgive me if I mispronounce this, Rogozin, with some baiting by SpaceX founder Elon Musk. Dmitry tweeted that the United States could use a trampoline to reach the International Space Station from now on, and that the RD-180 rockets, which are the bases for the ones launched by the United Launch Alliance, they're supplied by Russia and utilized by that organization, would be halted without a guarantee from our government that all the rockets would be used only for non-military purposes, which they were not being used for all military purposes. We were launching satellites for the Air Force with them. And as we learned from Afghanistan, political instability can suddenly find you without a way to get supplies to your outposts. And a politically diverse supplier and transportation base is a highly advantageous strategy. If one crisis completely irrelated to your goals and aspirations can completely shut down your project. And so it's very important to kind of spread that out, politically diverse instead of just culturally diverse. The second thing I want to talk about is getting back to supply routes in Afghanistan. And in my opinion, one of the most interesting uses for surplus materials in the operating theater might be immediately recognizable to many readers of science fiction. For decades, authors and engineers alike have suggested reutilizing containers, such as the main fuel tanks from the space shuttle or interplanetary cargo containers dropped on a future Martian surface. I'm a big fan of Kim Stanley Robinson, for human habitats. And in Afghanistan, the coalition forces found itself in possession of hundreds of thousands of shipping containers, also known as Connex boxes. So we got creative. These shipping containers were ingeniously reused as living quarters, shower, shave, and latrine systems in offices. The SSL for shave, shower, and latrine, other than the SSS, which I'm going to save you from that, but I recognize some people are laughing, so they get that part. And mission control centers. We built everything out of Connex boxes. You suddenly didn't have to ship lumber in. You didn't have to pay contractors who honestly didn't always have the motivation to build your command and control centers when you're looking to hire local labor. We could easily set them up right out of these boxes. So when colonists on Mars are looking to expand their habitable environment, they'll likely look to these examples for inspiration in converting their own cargo containers into useful spaces. As you can see different examples of cargo containers that were used for different purposes in here. We even used them for bomb shelters. You can just open them up, hide inside, cover them in concrete, much in the same way that you see like maybe a Bigelow inflatable habitat that they're talking about, that you would cover it in sand or Mars concrete to protect from radiation. We already have examples of this being utilized, so it's not a theory anymore, which is kind of cool, in my opinion. But one of the other areas I wanted to talk about, and this is one of the ones that I had personal experience, very detailed personal experience in, was I want to touch on international and intercultural relations. This is actually a picture of Afghan forces. So this is the Afghan National Army's uniform here. And this guy I actually personally know. So this is Brigadier General Bayan Alar. He took over for my 3-star general, who's an Army general in Afghanistan. Interesting fact, he is, as far as I know, he's the only flag officer that is Hindu, culturally and religiously. He's actually a fantastic guy, and he was a perfect person to put in that position. Because of his being able to relate to the needs in that area. I know if anybody who's a fan of that region knows that before Pakistan and India split apart, the British had put them all into one big country, and so although they do separate on religious lines, they do have a lot of cultural things in common. And you'll know in Pakistan, the Pashtun tribe, which is the tribe that Karzai comes from. He's the leader of Afghanistan right now, and for a little bit longer maybe, depending on if he wants to give up power. Yeah, he comes from the Pashtun tribe, which is the dominant tribe there, and they cross over the Pakistan and Afghan border. In fact, the British drew the line specifically to cut the tribe in half so that they wouldn't obtain full power for one national region. The British were really, really good at that, actually. If that was their goal, was to keep them from getting too powerful. But what I wanted to touch on was that it was my experience that even during meetings between American English-speaking civilian contractors and military personnel alone, misunderstandings about project goals, responsibilities, expectations can occur very, very easily in these environments. Just having cultural knowledge, it kind of imbues you with like a certain words and language that you would talk about in the military, but you wouldn't talk about in the civilian world, for example. And when you add in language and cultural differences, these issues can compound exponentially, causing enormous delays in operations. So we found a way to solve that for the most part. There we go. So one of the ways we figured out to solve this issue, and I'm sure that we were not the first to think of it, but we used it pretty much for every single meeting, is that we put a person in the meeting, usually lower ranked most of the time actually, the ones that I participated in, it was me. I ended up being the only enlisted man in the room in front of a whole bunch of flag officers and colonels and civilian contractors that had been previously flag officers and colonels. And it was my place and ideally you would have a mixed background, both sides, as this person would need to have experience on both sides of the table, kind of either share culturally or language-wise. And my job was to sit in on these meetings and exclusively listen and watch for body language of the participants in the meetings to really key in on that exact moment. And a lot of you guys know this from, maybe your personal relationships, that exact moment when misunderstanding happens. You can kind of read it on their face. And the great thing about not being an invested party in that, but being able to sit in the room and look for that kind of a problem, is that you can just raise your hand and go, "Sir, I believe that he was talking about this and not that. Maybe we should consider bringing this issue up again, because I don't think that he really understood what you meant this, but he heard that." As a reservist now, as I'm no longer active duty as a reservist, I had a key position being both connect the civilian world and the military world. So I was able to kind of translate between some of that. But is there
a title for that position?
There isn't, but I found other groups starting to use this. But
junior enlisted?
Exactly. Here's the trick: grab somebody who doesn't have a dog in the fight, but kind of understands both sides. Shove them in the room and say, "All I want you to do is listen for when somebody completely doesn't get it, and then speak up." And that's your only job. And that solved so many issues. We saved months of back work just by having that one position created, and that's incredibly important. So
that would kind of maybe prevent mixing up your metric system, your measurement systems, for example.
Exactly. Although when I came with RIMPAC, I was talking with the Canadians and I was joking with them, and I told them, I said, "There's two types of countries: those that use the metric system and those that have been to the moon." They liked that one, although they corrected me. They said we use the metric system to get to the moon. So I'm not sure if that's probably right. But finally, and summarize the three areas that I think that you can pull experience from Afghanistan and take it with us forward into other operations is the need for political diversity in your suppliers and your transportation routes, reusing storage containers, reusing the materials you bring with you that you never would have thought could be reused in new and interesting ways, and lastly to remember that not everyone thinks like you. Not everyone talks like you, uses the same lingo, so if you can grab somebody and put them in the room specifically to listen for those miscommunications, you can definitely save yourself a ton of hassle. And one day, humans will make their way to Mars, and it is my hope that we will not only learn from our triumphs, but from our adversities. And that is my presentation. And I
Good points.
would love to take some questions.
One of the
Yes.
examples we can think of, having someone watch for possible misunderstanding is something that was important in the early Russian-U.S. negotiations. And I was involved in those, and I knew Russian pretty well. And I realized that so many words, especially with European languages, are cognates, but don't mean the same thing. And the key word that kept knocking people out was the word control. Now, the Russians use the word control, it doesn't mean control. That means like passport control, which is you monitor. And the word to control, to guide a process, is a whole other word in Russian. And yet people, even interpreters, were carelessly using the word control to mean two different things in the same conversations. And it would then lead to exactly what you're saying here. This is just one of, all your points are important. I want to just tell you, it was a terrific contribution, so thank you. And thank you for your service. But this issue of thinking you understand someone else or thinking that they should understand you, and as a typical American thing is when they're not understood, they tend to speak louder.
Definitely. Slower. And you have to be careful. One of the things, the peculiarities of Afghan culture was just because they've been completely, the whole civilization has been completely brutalized by the Taliban over the last several decades. They went from, if you would have saw Afghanistan in the 60s, it would have looked like the United States in the 60s. It went from that to being, the trash of just a completely trashed country in just those few short decades, where the literacy rate was at like less than 20%. But the culture, we had to be very careful of how we spoke, and we trained Afghan soldiers to do the jobs that they were going to have to replace us to do. We had to be very careful not to insult them. You guys remember listening to just a few days ago, unfortunately, this kind of affected me. One of we lost a 2-star general in Afghanistan a couple of days ago. And they were all questioning, was this a Taliban guy in there, or what was he? Because he was wearing, army officer. Was he somebody who got in there? And I can tell you right now, the Taliban didn't claim credit for it, and they love to claim credit for things that they do not do, and they didn't claim credit for this. And the sad thing about Afghan culture is that if you slight someone, if you insult someone, it's not unreasonable to think that this person will come back and want to get his honor back in a very visceral, very violent way. If you slight his troops, he's going to feel insulted, and he needs to get their honor back. And one of the ways that the culture teaches them to get the honor back is unfortunately through extreme violence. But that's just one of the other ways to kind of work together diplomatically and understand those differences. Do we have time for a couple questions?
There's someone that lived in one of those metal boxes for 8 months from a diesel stove tent. I love those things.
Yeah. Is there we have time for one more question? Oh, if I have 5 minutes, okay, actually.
So who do you think would be willing to help us with diversifying our politics and helping us with going to Mars?
This is my personal opinion. This is not the opinion of anything official. I just want to make sure that I say that. And half the people in this room are going to disagree with me when I say this. We have to work with China. We have to. We're economically tied to them.
That's true.
We're working with them militarily now. This RIMPAC operation that we just did in Hawaii, we invited 28 nations. We kicked Russia out and took China. Before, China was there. Actually, China participates in RIMPAC every year, just not officially. They like to send a little boat out and watch us. And every few minutes, every hour, the watch officer on deck comes by and he likes to ask, hey, where's the AIG? Where's the Chinese ship? Where are they at? We don't want to get them in the photograph, because they're not supposed to be there officially. But yeah, any others? I got 3 minutes.
How do you teach Americans to be more sensitive to other cultures?
Okay, again, you're not going to like this answer.
I think I will.
Okay, please stop watching mainstream news. Pick up, any of the channels, any of them. Fox is just as bad as MSNBC, is just as bad as CNN. Watch CNN International, and then watch CNN, and watch the differences. Watch BBC. Watch Al Jazeera International, not the America channel. Get those point of views. Go search out. Get on Reddit. Get on publicly owned, user-owned news sites. Get the raw story, and then make the judgment for yourself. You have to look at the world as not as much of a dangerous place as we're told it is. Go out and explore.
Learn some goddamn other languages.
I've walked through the Philippines. I've walked through Australia. Walked through communist China by myself. They're just normal people out there, and yeah, some of them are really messed up people. But you know what? Detroit's a really messed up place. I feel safer. I feel about as safe walking through Kabul as I would in Detroit. Honestly. I think one more question, and then yes, sir.
So how would you insert the concepts that you have or introduce them into the sort of mission planning you're talking about? Because what you're talking about are kind of lessons learned that we should be putting in at the front end, and I wonder how you see that being implemented at the beginning instead of trying to catch up all the time while you're doing it.
One of the ways to fast track these lessons is grab people in your organization that have experience doing this. 4 years of enlistment in any military branch gives you a basic, natural approach to analyzing a situation. We call them like a spot report or a spot report. Being able to articulate in writing what was the good things, what were the bad things. Put these people in your organization. So we find out at the university I work in that all the student clubs, all of the leadership for these clubs, the veterans start floating to the top. The guys that are coming in, they're 22, they're just out of the military, they have their GI Bills, and they start taking over these clubs because they're the ones that have the experience, they can articulate themselves. So find these people who they're very young and they have this experience, put them in your organization and say, what do you think about this? You know, you don't have to put them in charge, but say, what do you think about this? And they're very used to giving somebody else the answers and letting them take credit. So as an enlisted man, that's my point of view. But I think I'm, yeah.
How long are you staying around? Are you staying for the conference?
I'm staying for the whole conference. I actually missed last year's conference because I was in Afghanistan. But I was here for the 2 years prior. I was actually, if you guys were in Pasadena, I was the guy everyone yelled for when the live feed went down. They all yelled, Todd! And that was me. So thank you very much.